everyone, welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and on our show today we have Annie Richards. Annie is a third-generation Vermonter. She's a family psychiatric nurse practitioner and holds a master's from Yale. She also has her own practice here in town where she specializes in child and adolescent mental health. So welcome today, Annie, on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very glad to have you. So yes, you were born and raised and schooled in the area, mostly in Brattleboro. And one of your early kudos is the fact that you were the second baby to be born in the Brattleboro Hospital Birthing Center.
Yes, I was.
Yes.
And when they first renovated that center, I was baby number 2.
Number 2. And that was back in '79, so it's interesting to see that that was the beginning of birthing centers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was something very new. And when you were young, when you were a baby, you went through a whole series of operations. You were in and out of hospitals for quite a while.
I was. I definitely had, it came out kind of guns blazing and had a pretty strong relationship with Boston Children's in those early years. And so there were numerous surgeries, one of which was a really significant spinal one in around 1985. And then a bunch of other ancillary ones to correct some different anomalies that were just congenital. And for the most part, anything surgical was down in Massachusetts, but then I was able to, you know, I had a normal relationship with a family practitioner in town for, you know, your basic well child checkups, and I was one of those kids that really wasn't sick very often.
For like a preschool time, you were at the Prouty Center, is that right?
I was, yeah. Back then, this was really before they had a full-fledged early learning center, and so it was predominantly intensive services and developmental services, where kids would go for things like speech and language, gross motor skills, and a lot of the work would happen in homes, too, where the people who worked there would go to people's homes and work with parents around supporting the needs of their kids. So it was kind of a combo for me as far as how much time I spent at the actual Prouty Center site and how much of it was home-based. It was run much more like almost like a clinic. But yeah, pretty much through, I'd say around age, 3 or 4. That's where it was, and then I ultimately segued into preschool at Hilltop. So when I was there, it only went through 3rd grade at that point.
At 3rd grade. And then did you go to Dummerston?
I did.
You did?
I did.
And so that was another neighborhood school.
It was. And I can remember the person who, you know, kind of like took me under her wing, and she either just was like naturally very kind and kind of empathic to, you know, taking on the new kid, or maybe she had a little shout out from the teacher ahead of time that like, hey, we've got this person coming, and, you know, can you be the one to sort of show her around? And I still remember that. I remember how sweet she was.
Oh, that's so nice.
During that first day when I knew nobody.
Yeah, yeah, and meanwhile, you know, you have a family that was incredibly not only supportive but gave you such tremendous opportunities growing up.
Absolutely, they really
no holding back.
No holding back. Really, no excuses. And being the only girl in the family, and in this neck of the woods, the only girl even among all the cousins. There was definitely no holding back, and no, you know, you had to develop a pretty thick skin as the only girl.
And the youngest,
and
for the most part,
pretty much the youngest.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was not a pretty sight when I went through my New Kids on the Block phase, circa 1989, 90.
That wasn't a pretty phase for anybody.
No. Got endless amounts of flack for that one.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So, but it was good though. Definitely built up a good thick skin and the ability to think on your feet.
Yeah, right.
And develop the witty comeback.
I was going to say repartee.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, a very big part.
Totally.
Of survival.
Yep.
Yeah, for all of us.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you learned how to play the piano. You did downhill skiing.
Yep. Did skating. Did you know, really, you know, for the most part, did everything just like everybody else. And you know, if there were adaptations that needed to happen along the way, we would figure them out together.
That's so great. That's so great. And you eventually did adaptive driving as well.
I did. That was one of the most awesome accomplishments. I did there's a program in New Hampshire that, oh no, actually it was further north. I think it was closer to the White River Junction area, that specialized in adaptive driving education. And
Yes.
so, bless my mother, she would bring me up there a couple days a week for my lessons. So instead of doing driver's ed through the high school, that's where I went for my lessons. And Bruce was my instructor. And by the end of that period, we knew everything about each other as we would drive around that town and the ins and the outs and just kind of shoot the breeze along the way. So
very close relationship, right?
But yeah, but it was great. I mean, they really, from day one, they were able to, you know, look at my needs and say, okay, we only need this, this, and this within the car, and you'll be fine. And, you know, even now when I drive, it's really just, there's a few things that are part of the car that I have installed whenever I, you know, trade in for another another model, and it's pretty easy.
Yeah, well, and you know, it all takes a lot of creativity as well. You know, trying to find the ways that are going to work for you and that are specific to you.
Exactly.
As well.
One example was learning how to parallel park, and really relying on the mirrors as the sole focus for where to orient, because that ability to sort of turn and, you know, look over my shoulder was really difficult. So really looking at, you know, the rear view mirror and where, at what point on the mirror to orient to in relation to the, you know, headlight on the car behind me when I'm turning, was a bit of a skill.
Yeah, when I took my driver's test, I knocked over a garbage can.
My first,
Parallel parking.
Yeah, my first experience driving was the riding lawnmower, and I hit a tree. So there you go.
You were unscathed, I hope.
Yeah, I was unscathed, but the tree wasn't. Not so much.
So, I know that you had a pretty great time in high school at BUHS. A lot of friends that you still maintain over all these years.
Yep. Yeah, we had our high school reunion in June of 2017.
17. So that was 20. Wait a minute.
That was the big 20.
That was 20. Oh my gosh, that was 20 years. That's unbelievable. And you went on to college. You went to Williams, and what was it like there for you?
Initially, it was a tough adjustment. I think as somebody who didn't have a lot of like sleepaway camp experiences or just time, you know, sustained time away from home. Even though Williams is only really an hour and a half from here, it felt really intense, and I was really homesick for that first semester. The stakes were really raised a lot by comparison to what I was doing at BUHS. But realistically, I would say by, you know, the middle of that year and into the spring of that first year, you know, I had met a lot of other people and kind of found my way, and it was a much brighter picture coming out of that year, and then just sort of gradually got better and better over those 4 years. But Williams is an amazing place with some really amazing people.
Yes, and you decided on a psych major pretty early?
I did. True? I went in. I went in pretty early on, thinking that was the route that I was going to go. And you know, the thing about a place like Williams, you know, which is a liberal arts school, is you're required to take certain courses within 3 different divisions. So even if you know you're going to major in a certain field, you have to take a certain number of courses. It's up to you kind of how you wanted to do it over the 4 years, but you had to fulfill a certain amount within each. So it gives you the ability to really kind of, you know,
I know, it's great.
See what you like.
It's a wider realm of knowledge as well that you're getting. And how did you move into nursing?
It was kind of a circuitous route. So as I was getting closer to the end of my time at Williams, you know, really, you know, it's like the end of my junior year when people are really starting to think about the next steps and plan and go into their senior year, you know, thinking about what they were going to do after they graduate. You know, my major was psych, which I think a lot of people will agree is kind of like majoring in liberal arts. There's so many directions you can go with it, or you can go in no direction. It's very general. And I had talked with some friends of mine that were looking into nursing, or either were current nursing students in other schools, and really thinking about that as kind of the platform for how to utilize what I was learning in psych and use it in a way that was really, you know, marketable diverse, could go in a lot of different directions with it. And there, at that time, you know, really like there is now, there was such a huge shortage in nursing that it just seemed like it could be a really good fit. But I liked the ability that of knowing that you could go in a lot of different directions with it, which just sounded good to me as somebody who wasn't completely sure how I was gonna, you know, where I was gonna land.
Yes, and was it when you were at Yale that you were doing the real practical thing, going into hospitals?
It was actually before that. So what I did was I felt like I was a chronic student. I graduated from Williams on June 3rd of 2001, took one day off, and then the next day, June 5th, started classes to ultimately roll into an accelerated bachelor's in nursing program, which was through UMass in Amherst. And so, but before doing that, I had all these, you know, kind of core science classes that I had to fulfill that I just didn't, either they didn't offer at Williams or I didn't have time to take. So I did that first and then rolled into this UMass program, which was about 18 months or so of kind of the equivalent of the undergrad in nursing minus all of the electives that somebody would be taking if they were doing it at a four-year college. So it was intense. It was really fast-paced, and it was, I mean, first semester I had a clinical all the way down in Great Barrington, Mass. So every Saturday I would go to a friend's house from Williams who lived in Sunderland, sleep in her chair, wake up on Sunday at 4 a.m., go do a 12-hour shift, and then ultimately make my way back to Vermont.
Brutal.
Where I would go to sleep and then get up the next day and go back to school. So when I think about it now, I don't know how I did it. But it was...
And were you working toward focusing on children at that point?
I was, yeah. I knew kind of from the get-go that I really wanted to work with kids. And so the rotations that were more specific to pediatrics or, you know, parts of my clinical where I was working more with the younger patients, that was just... was much more of a good fit. You had more affinity working with kids. Definitely.
But after all of this extensive training and learning and being in school, Annie, where'd you go from there?
So after I finished at UMass and I worked for about a year or so as an RN, just to have a little break from school, I rolled into the graduate program at Yale and did that, which for me was a traditional 2-year track, and lived down in New Haven, and then ultimately moved back. I knew I wanted to move back to Vermont when I was done. I just, with all of my family here and just it being my roots, that's what I wanted. So I planned for that all along, and came back and really talked with a bunch of different people in the community that were in the different mental health arenas and worked with kids to get a sense of what was needed here, kind of what could be some creative options for somebody with my skill set, and ultimately took a job with Early Education Services working for their what was their infant child guidance program, which is a program that services kids 6 and under with social emotional needs in their families. And I would say about 75% of those kiddos were part of the Head Start, Early Head Start population, but not exclusively. So we could also we could have had clients that were in the general community as well. So.
And how long did you do that?
So I worked for them for about 4 years or so. That program itself really went through a bunch of different changes with the state and is now really kind of come under what's now known as Children's Integrated Services. The program that I worked for is the early childhood mental health portion of CIS, and is run, it's kind of almost like a hybrid that's run through HCRS, but there's a strong connection, and it's physically housed at the Winston Prouty Center over on the Austin campus. So it's still going, still doing its thing.
Well, it sounds also like your approach is a lot more holistic, looking at the mental and the physical with kids.
Definitely.
And that seems to be where your affinity is as well.
I think so, and certainly in the ways that I've tried to work with community partners, and really, you know, kind of look at it from more of a wraparound, multidimensional
right.
approach.
And, yes, and having your own practice, is that one of the things that led you to that you could really start exploring things that were more of interest to you specifically?
Absolutely, yeah, and really having that autonomy to do so, and just the flexibility to say, this is, this is the population that I'd really like to work with. These are the kinds of the areas of focus that I'm drawn to, and to have a flexible schedule and really have that ability to develop a much more real work-life balance. And by the time I was ready to do that, by the time I made that move to go into private practice, that was a much bigger priority for me.
I've got to say, I was fortunate enough to visit, to speak with Annie ahead of time at her offices here in town on Walnut Street, and it's just the sweetest place. It's a place where I think any kid walking in would not only feel at home, would just be wanting to go to all these different little stations you have of things that they can do, and little play areas, and a whole little rack of costumes. I mean, it was just so appealing. And the colors that you've chosen, it's lively, it's bright, it's a happy, happy place.
Thank you. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse, because it's so wonderful. I think there's a lot of kids that don't want to leave.
Yeah.
So sometimes the transitions can get a little,
I'll bet, yeah,
a little tricky. But I think for those kids, we develop a pretty good system to make that work. So it's more fluid, and there are some kids that I just know that I have to leave a good 15-20 minute window between appointments, because otherwise it will be a little bit of a log jam.
I can see wanting to just hang out there for the whole day.
But
there's so many things to do. There are so many things to do. And how do the kids respond to you? Because I know you get right in there with them. You put on the costumes as well.
I do. I try to have some variety in the costume rack that I know is going to fit me, so that I can really. I mean, my philosophy is always that I'm entering their world. It's not the other way around. So that's part of why I wanted the space to reflect that, and really be as whimsical and imaginative as possible. Yeah, I mean, I take a pretty non-directive approach, so really trying to follow their lead and see what they bring to the table, and then use that and kind of scaffold on that to help build skills that are lagging, or really address those areas of concern that brought them there in the first place.
Yeah, and it's what you would call play, like it's all sort of play therapy.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you find that the reality that you see in your office every day, is it very different from how you were schooled in college and in grad school?
It is pretty different, I think, for a few reasons. One is that I think just the trends that we're seeing now compared to what was going on when I was in school, back in the early 2000s, is pretty different. I mean, certainly with the rise in opioids, that's really taking its toll on families, and trickling down to kids and what their needs are and what they're experiencing. And I think, I certainly had to develop a lot more experience in working with systems, and really working with the legal and the social service and protective custody systems.
Yes.
Which has, I mean, there's just such a rise in the number of kids that are in custody, and all of the moving parts that go along with that, and working within that sort of that broader system. But I think also too, just being in school, especially at the graduate level, working in a place like New Haven, Connecticut, is pretty dramatically different than, southeastern Vermont as far as the diversity, and also at that point too, I was working with a much broader age range, so there were kids that I was working with that were, closer to 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I mean, I've kind of whittled my area of focus to really kind of, the cutoff is more around 13, 14, and that's more my sweet spot.
Yeah.
So it is pretty different.
Yeah, it is different. And were you trained in school for this kind of, obviously things culturally have changed, and as you said, the opioid epidemic, and so was there kind of training, or have you done adjunct training over the years for that?
And there was some training, but so much of my training was because it was so nursing focused, it was much more on the medical end of it,
Right.
and you know, really applying a much more structured approach to working with patients and clients.
Yeah.
Whereas I think over the years that's kind of loosened, and I've been I've tried to get a little bit more creative and I guess kind of thinking outside the box when developing ideas and strategies to help the families that I'm working with.
The families that you're,
Yeah.
and each family is different.
Each family is very
Right,
different.
Yeah, and calls upon different kinds of perspectives and
Yeah.
skills and how to work with them. Yeah.
And you know, and the other partners that they're working with,
Right.
because so much of that is part of my work as well.
That's right. And you're called in for consulting as well.
Yeah, occasionally.
Yeah.
Yep, with the court. That's sort of become a little bit of a new arena for me, is
Yeah.
to be called in almost as a, you know, an expert witness. It's may not necessarily be working with the family, but speaking to a specific subject matter or theme
Right.
that's relevant in the court right now.
And I would think a lot of that would be around custody these days and foster care, that kind of thing.
Yep.
How do you like that?
I do like it. I like the you know, I'm one of those people that likes to stay busy and keep moving. And there's always a lot of moving parts
Yeah.
when it comes to working with kiddos that are in custody or in
right.
foster care,
Yeah.
or you know, have some sort of involvement with the Department of Children and Families. And I think one area that this is definitely something I was not trained for, but just by nature of where I started working when I graduated and the different experiences since then, I think I'm getting pretty good at being able to work with larger teams and kind of help be almost like a coordinator for team approaches.
Oh, that's great.
And really, you know, kind of having those discussions
Yeah.
with families
Yeah.
Within the larger team of who they're working with, to really get away from that almost silo mentality that can happen so easily when, you know, everybody's kind of very well intentionally doing their part
Their own
to
thing.
to
Yes.
serve, you know, to serve families and really do what they
Right.
need to do. But that crosstalk
Yes.
doesn't
Yes.
happen as much.
Well, that's great, and that is a huge skill in
Yeah.
itself. And how do you think? I mean, because you've seen a lot of this now, especially these last few years. How? What do you think community support and response is for in this community for kids? How do you feel about it?
I think it's huge. I mean, I've been really lucky to work in the different arenas that I have, where I've sort of, because of the type of work that we did and the type of consulting that we did outside of that with different early education centers and preschools and elementary schools, have really gotten to know so many of the players that those are the hats they wear.
Yeah,
Are, you know,
that's very encouraging
serving
to hear.
kids, and it's, you know, there's a lot of very passionate people in our community that are just trying to do their best to really serve kids as best they can. And so, yeah, I think the response is huge. I mean, funding always tends to be a challenge, and that's always an ongoing issue. But I think the drive and the intention and the you know, the knowledge and
Goodwill.
and just you know, the empathy is definitely there.
That's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful. So these are sort of questions I'm going to throw at you. What do you like best about what you do?
Well,
Or let's put that, what's the hardest thing that you do, and what do you like best about what you do?
well, I think, you know, one of the hardest things that I do is I think just in a way it's kind of the hardest and the best is just sort of really hearing kids' stories and really letting them have a voice at the table to express whatever it is they're going through in the context of you know, what's often a much larger issue within their family and their community. And being able to just have a very safe, isolated time for them to voice those things.
Yeah, that's safe.
Is very gratifying, but it's also incredibly hard and exhausting at the same time. And you know, that's when really good self-care and self-awareness for where you know, my own limitations might be has to kind of come to the table.
Yeah.
As it would for anybody in my field.
Yeah, yeah. Where do you go to rejuvenate?
Well, I mean, I think music is always good. That's always been a good rejuvenation for me.
Yeah.
I love all kinds of music, and that can be just, you know, the drive to and from having something that's on the radio that just kind of, you know, speaks to me is a great escape.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. You know, just being with family and, you know, shifting things when I'm spending time with them or being with good friends.
Yeah.
Is really, you know, that tends to fill my bucket.
Yeah, yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Like anybody who's in these kind of intense interpersonal relationships, you know, whether it's as a psychologist or a nurse or a caregiver or in the court system, you know, I mean, we all have our different parts to play, and it's good to know where you can go.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Annie, being a third generation Vermonter, and not only that, but a local person Vermonter, there was a family business that was also all three generations. Your brothers are part of Richard's group, and but you did not choose to join Richard's group. You went your own way.
Yeah, I definitely went my own way. I did have the occasional summer job there in high school where I was. This was before they had a legit shredding service, so I would be the one in the dungeon shredding paperwork and being completely sure that I was going to die there and somebody would find me eventually. But nope, it was definitely, you know, it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But
and you knew that early on.
And I knew that early on.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's wonderful, you know, that it is still in the family. And
absolutely,
that
it's doing better than ever.
That's so great. Annie, thank you so much for being on the show
Thank
today.
you for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. It's wonderful to hear your voice. And as I said, it was just so terrific to see where you are doing your practice, and just knowing that so many kids would just love to walk in that door and have fun with you.
Thank you. We always have fun, if nothing else. That is an end goal.
That is saying a lot.
Totally.
And it's saying a whole lot if it's your job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Annie. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. That was a fun show. We will be back next week, and we look forward to seeing you then.